Dangerous people are indoctrinating your children. That's according to a leading conservative who's warning parents in a new video about sending their kids to America's liberal colleges.
You're supporting ideologues who claim that all truth is subjective, that all sex differences are socially constructed, and that Western imperialism is the sole source of all third world problems.
The man in that video, Dr. Jordan Peterson, is with us right now. He's a University of Toronto psychology professor and author of the world hit book. It's called 12 Rules for Life, an Antidote to Crisis, which has spoken to so many people. Dr. Peterson, we thank you very much for joining us live. In that introduction, you say, I quoted you as saying there are dangerous people teaching your children. Who are you talking about?
Well, increasingly, and this isn't only the case in the universities, people are being taught by ideologues, not by educators. And ideologues have a very simple way of looking at the world. They reduce it to a few principles like inequality and unfairness and power. Those would be the fundamental principles at the moment that are operating on the radical left, and they're on an ideological campaign. And that's increasingly the case in elementary, junior high, and high schools as well, mostly because the faculties of education are full of people who are radical. So, and this is well documented. I mean, even the Chronicle of Higher Education came out a month ago with a blistering piece on faculties of education, describing them as academically suspect and ideologically possessed, which I think is exactly right.
Well, we've talked a lot about that on this program, but the question is for parents who are thinking about sending their kids to college someday or already have, is this effort, rather than these professors and whatnot being educators but being ideologues, where'd that come from? Is it a concerted across-the-board thing, or is it just happening by accident?
I think part of it's still a hangover from the 1960s, I would say, and perhaps even a bit of a hangover from the Cold War.
What do you mean? You mean the people from the 60s and 70s are now...
Well, and the ethos that was broadcast so widely in the 1960s, and there was a lot of stress in the 60s, especially because of the Vietnam War and the consequences of the ongoing Cold War, and we're still sort of suffering from the aftermath of that ideological battle. But I also think the universities made a dreadful mistake expanding their humanities purview to include disciplines like women's studies and these ethnic studies disciplines, which aren't disciplines. They're pseudo-disciplines at best, and they have very, very low academic standards, and they're corrupting the rest of the enterprise. And so, and that's not a good thing.
What do you mean corrupting the rest of the enterprise?
Well, you need to have standards in education, and the fact that disciplines emerged that had no real methodology and no method of proof, no philosophical background, no real history, meant that they became degree-granting enterprises, and that they emerged to produce political activists, which is exactly what they advertise on their websites. Means that you've got a fifth column of ideologues operating behind the scenes, and they spend almost all of their time engaged in political activism, and that's not good for the university as a whole, by any stretch, or for society as a whole.
Well, Jordan, if somebody's thinking about sending their kid to college, I've put 3 through good schools. What should they know about where they send their kids? Well, I mean, it's not like you have a big choice, because a lot of the people in positions of power in education are to the political left. I mean, that's just a fact.
You can go look up the Heterodox Academy online. That's run by Jonathan Haidt, who he's a main player in it. He's here in New York, and he's tried to rank order universities by their adherence to truth rather than social justice, and put University of Chicago at the top of the list, for example. And I think increasingly that parents and students will wise up and start not attending the universities that are basically playing an ideological game.
What is the matter with having people from the ideological left being your children's instructors, though? I mean, ultimately,
it depends on how...
You want all sides of the equation. You want to know all the opinions.
Well, yes, you do, but there's no evidence that the middle of the road or the conservative side of the opinion spectrum is being represented in the humanities and the social sciences.
And that's your worry?
That, and the fact that there's something to be said for the left, but there's not very much to be said for the radical left. And that distinction isn't being made. And the left can clearly go too far, as it did many times in the 20th century. And so when it gets too radical, especially when there's no countering voices, and there are very few, then that's a bad thing. It's bad for education. It's bad for broader society. It's altogether bad.
Right. Jordan, you've been around the world talking your book up. People stop you on the street all the time now. What's the one thing you have learned since your book, 12 Rules for Life, An Antidote to Chaos, came out? How has the response been, and how has it impacted you?
Well, I've learned two things. I've learned that people are starving for a real conversation about responsibility and meaning, and about the relationship between those two things, because people need a sustaining meaning in their life, and it's not to be found through rights and impulsive gratification. It's to be found through the adoption of responsibility. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that people are a lot smarter than we think. So if you allow them long-form dialogue time, even in public lectures, there's a huge market for it. There's a huge hunger for it. Podcasts and the new video media that's emerging online with these long-form discussions is that people are smarter than we thought, and people can listen to very complex material. So that's a really positive thing.
Right. Well, it's always a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much for the invitation.
He's actually going to be on PBS very shortly.
Yep.
And, of course, the big book is called 12 Rules for Life. It's a worldwide bestseller. Dr. Jordan Peterson, thank you, sir.
Thanks very much.